Okay, I think we are going to start because Marziah will take some minutes. She's in Iran, and then her conditions are a bit, I would say, the connectivity and so on is a bit different. So my name is Vicente Guayart. I am one of the IAAC founders, and we are here today because we have organized in the year 2005, we decided to launch a competition that I think was one of the first competitions done completely online, because the idea was how we could use internet in order to create some global debates about some relevant topics. The first year we had that competition, that was the topic was the self-sufficient housing. It was a moment where we were still in the bubble of construction, and we wanted to discuss how we could add more value to architecture by being more ecological and so on. And the good news is that there were more than 1,000 people registered from 100 countries. And then we discovered that this idea of creating these global debates, and then that the award of the winner of this competition was started to IAAC, was good for everyone, because then we were giving opportunities for people to present their work. Also, ACTAR is doing and will be doing the publication for this competition also. And then the question is that, well, it was a kind of success, and we have been repeating this competition every 2 years since 14 years ago. So right now, this year was the year where we should launch the competition. Have this challenge of the pandemic, and then obviously we thought that we should connect this debate about architecture, the city, and so on, in relation to this topic, because we were in the middle of a battle against the climate change, and now we discovered that we need to battle also for our life and for our living conditions. We have organized 4 debates, with some of them with some of the jurors of the competition. If you go to the website, you can see that there are around 30 jurors from all 5 continents. And today is the last event where we have invited, in fact, 5 women to do this debate. Marziah should be the moderator, not me, but she is not connecting. That's why I'm helping. And so the idea is that to all our speakers, we'll give something like 10 minutes to make a presentation or to share some thoughts about how you think that we could react, or how architecture or living in the future can be, and how we can improve the living conditions, and also the uncertainty that is in front of us in cities, in architecture, in our living environment, through design. And this is the topic of our conversation. So the first person that will talk will be Carolyn Boss. She's she's co-founder of UNStudio. She has been teaching in many places and writing many books. So I think it's not necessary that I do a long introduction, but we are very happy that she can share her ideas in order to try to frame this discussion. Okay, so Caroline, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vicente. Before I start, well, it's great to be here. I mean, Dana, you are on. Okay, yeah, Dana will.
Yes, I'm here as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Good. So we at some of the images I collected for this talk. It's the second Zoom presentation I give for an audience that I don't know at all. So that's a very interesting experience, and a little bit tricky, because I always try to sense what people are thinking and what they would like to hear. It's a bit difficult now, so it's a bit happy-go-lucky, but let's see. This is still, it's a very interesting moment in any way to meet and in this way and to address also this topic of urban life. We've all been experiencing a condition which has occurred actually many times in history, but not in our lifetime. And it has tested our resilience, our solidarity, and our very urbanity. Most of us are actually based and living and dependent on cities. But cities that now have some of their essence missing. It's on hold, it's out of our reach. And yet, this has encouraged also many of us to think about how to improve urban life and our facilities, but not to discard the city. I never hear, very few say we're ready to flee the city for good. We're not giving up on urban life. And even before the current crisis, we were well aware of the challenges that cities face. Health has been for us, for UNStudio, the #1 concern for a long, long time, which of course we are not alone in. And these challenges, they are really about balance, because all of these points, these 9 points, are also what makes city life attractive and what make people flourish in cities. But they are often at a breaking point. You can thrive or you can fall through the net with all of these. And these points require continuous attention and maintenance. Next slide. For us at UNStudio, with over 30 years of very diverse work in many settings, and you know, it's not all masterpieces, but it's all been driven by questions like this one, you know, the central question to each and every project has really been about trying to make a solution, to do something that makes it situation a little bit better in the conditions that very different conditions that we could work, and with all the limitations that we necessarily have in our profession. So next. Not to say that you can make a manual for how to design for urban life, or there's any way that you can always get it right. But for us, the last years, I have for myself defined 3 dominant themes in our approach to this. And these are the 3 ones. So collaborating is very important. Incorporating, really working with digital technology, it says, but also really technology as it changes, the new technologies, the new frontiers that society is bringing up. And then, as I said already, designing for the future is designing for the health. Of course, health, not just for us people, but all living life, all living beings on Earth. Next, from the very first beginning of UNStudio, if we go to the next slide, if possible, we were made aware that any architectural or urban intervention is actually part of a bigger question, a bigger scheme, and a greater good. It's not just about what the things that we make, design itself. What we have to do is make something that is alive. It has a job to do. It has to perform and to deliver, activate people. And that's the role of design, to stimulate and this good, mutually beneficial behavior. And this slide says it also, to inspire. We make something and then it makes you make the next thing. Your own creativity is triggered. Urban life, it's continuously created and recreated, co-created. There's never a final word in it. That's also why it matters so much. And of course, you as the designer, here I have the slide, design models, you bring in your own part, your own fascinations. We cannot just be a good listener. we have to also bring in something into dialogue. And this is, yeah, with, you know, also already quite a long time ago that this book was made. Somehow books seem to be, yeah, less relevant, less attractive to read, maybe these books on architecture, but also less attractive to write, I find. But maybe that's just me, getting old. But so we have to bring in our own fascinations, and here with that design novels we categorized somewhat freely the recurring themes of our work, and then the next step is trying to share that, what we learn, what fascinates us, what we observe, trying to group it, get a grasp, and bring it into the open. An open kitchen, you could say, in the restaurant of UNStudio. Innovation is not a solitary pursuit. So collaboration, this collaborative mode, it's a lot of work to bring that machine in action. Next slide. But a happy collaboration across cultures is possible in our experience. And with strong common goals and led by real needs also, and a real wish to innovate. So in that sense, we can also be grateful for our problems because they can point us in new directions. And for instance, the little exploded diagram of Arnhem Central Station, the driver for this multimodal transportation hub, is also a need for very intensive use of ground in the Netherlands as a super densely populated country. So that's a problem we have, which can also result in innovation and in a new urbanity in what could be a very boring leftover transit space alone. So next. So as I've my little questions that I've used as headlines, is a lot of what we do is question-led. The questions, they are the what matter, not the answers. It's the questions that we keep looking for, and that can that we have to keep an open mind to, most of all. Next, and for us, one of the three themes, as that I mentioned, is this engagement with innovative technology. And it has been always present in our work, and currently we're deep into very heavy experimenting with sensory-based technology. We see it around us. Everyone carries we carry our technology with us all day long, can hardly be separated from it. We all use it with reservations. We're all critical and worried about it as well, but it brings us so many benefits. So we have to then ask ourselves, how can we adapt our urban approach, our built environment, to also take this technology that people are choosing. What does it mean? But can we find a meaningful architectural response for it that can also, of course, and must make the built environment more sustainable? We waste less, we are built smarter if we integrate that technology. So that's one of the themes that we are working with. And then last but not least, this is my concluding slide already. Designing for the future, I said, means designing for health. And we are all very aware, more than ever, how interwoven physical, mental, and emotional health are. So designing for a healthy urban world also means designing with emotional response in mind. It's something we don't often discuss, and maybe least of all in academic circles. But if we cannot do it now, when can we? So this is my last little statement that I'd like to make is about, yeah, a healthy urban life matters, and let's really also learn much more about how can we promote emotional health in that. Thanks very much.
Carolyn, thank you so much. I'm very sad to have missed the very beginning of your talk. I had some technical issues connecting. Hello to everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're connecting from. I'm pleased to host the last event in the Design for Living series and moderate this discussion tonight. So I'll take it from here, and I would like to invite Aziz Shawnee now. I'll make a brief introduction of her before she starts her talk. Aziz Shawnee is a Moroccan architect. She currently teaches at the University of Toronto in Canada. Interestingly enough, when I posted today's event on my network and shared it, a friend of mine, Vahida Shraqi, he contacted me to say that he was really excited that Aziza is a member of the panel today, because he works with her at the University of Toronto, and he commented that it's really interesting that the world is small and COVID has made it smaller, and I sort of really felt how nice it is that we have these opportunities to connect with our colleagues and fellow designers during this time. Aziza is the founder of Aziza Chaouni projects. She leads a collaborative research platform that investigates the challenges of ecotourism and what ecotourism creates in the developing world. This platform is called DET, or Designing Ecological Tourism. Aziza was featured at a symposium organized by the Aga Khan program that explored public debates around the topic of the protection of historic centers in the Muslim world. Part of that panel was this idea of geographies old and new, where she looked at deserts, territories, and parks and their role in creating modern development. Her firm has won numerous awards for this work. So with that, I will let her take over and share her ideas with us.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this great introduction. I'm so happy, Marziah, that you were able to join us, and also that it's funny that we have this connection. I'm not going to start by sharing slide. I'm going to do something different. I mean, since this topic was a very important topic, I would like to start with a short text, and then I'm going to be sharing with you some slides. And first of all, I would like to thank Vicente for this invitation, but also for his feminist inclination, because it is extremely rare to have a panel with only women. Often when we have one, it's when it's a topic about women in architecture or gender or so forth. So really, thank you. I think it's fantastic. Actually, many people commented that it was very refreshing to have, this opportunity. So really, thank you so much. I'm very pleased to find myself among so many great feminine minds. So it is indeed very timely, for us to think of our post-corona urban environments. And there is actually no doubt that in the past, cities have been shaped by responses to different diseases. I'm sure you know that the plague, for example, wiped out at least a third of Europe's population in the 14th century. But it also spurred some radical urban improvement during the Renaissance, including the creation of very grand urban public spaces. And of course, the epidemic of the 20th century, like tuberculosis, polio, typhoid, and the Spanish flu that drove modern urban planning, including slum clearance, housing reform, but also waste management. Yet today, it remains very unclear how much the coronavirus will affect our cities in the near future. So what you find is a camp of pessimists that claim that business as usual will quickly return, pushed by forces of capitalism, and that no lessons would actually be learned. And you have a camp of optimists that promise that the pandemic is actually, as a force majeure event, will accelerate innovation and foster new practices and strategies for building better cities. So that is, like in general, more walkable cities with less car, more green spaces and mixed use of neighborhoods, remote working with mixed use neighborhoods, of course. And in other words, this group thinks that there is no turning back, that after this disease, we will actually be forced to envision like a new future. And actually, I found this very beautiful article of one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy, who's a woman, of course, and who very poetically described the pandemic as a gateway, as a portal between one word to the next, between the past and the future. And I found that actually a very beautiful description of this horrible pandemic. So it's actually very full of hope that we will be forced in a way to envision a new future. So there's no turning back. In this group also, this group counts Stefano Boeri, who proposed to de-densify cities by reviving underpopulated rural villages, and also to support remote working. Others, for example, like the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, she would like to continue already what's existing now for the long term in her city, like the practices of, for example, turning roads back to the pedestrian and cyclists, for example. Like another, interesting take also on the pandemic, and I was going to change our cities, is Philippe Ram, who actually recommended that we rethink the materialities of the city to stop the disease. And that, in a sense, would re-envision completely our cities. And finally, Ken Greenberg, who's an urban designer who's in Toronto, where actually I'm confined right now, is pressing us to connect and reinforce green corridors, turning them into extensive pedestrian networks. So, as you see, there are many different approaches that people propose, and they're very floatable, but actually for me, I found that they do not address the most endemic, long-lasting problem that the pandemic unveiled and actually exacerbated, which is the brutal structural social and economic inequality that's plaguing, unfortunately, like our cities. So I would like actually to speak about these inequalities from the prism of countries in the global south, and in general from my home country, Morocco, which I know well. So Morocco, like other, like African nations, was lauded for its efficient handling of the pandemic that was actually attributed to its past experiences with, like other type of viruses. And Morocco established very, very strict confinement measures that started on March 9th. And since then, of course, airports have been closed, boundaries between provinces were sealed, circulation in and out of cities were closed. You find police and soldiers and tanks that's patrolling in the street. You can actually be jailed for up to 3 days if you're found on the streets. And, like as a result, Morocco counts today 213 deaths related to COVID, which is really a far cry from neighboring Spain, for example, which has 20,328 deaths. However, the flip side of the success story in Morocco should be told. The pandemic actually shed light on a brutal reality, in Morocco, the very deep social and economic inequality. So if you compound this with a very weak urban governance and not that much funds, what you get is, like a rift between poor and rich that has become even more deep. So for example, I'm going to give you an example. So when the confinement was announced in Morocco, the middle class and the elite went and hid in gated communities and in their beach homes and summer homes, etc., where the rest of the population so either became homeless because they became unemployed, or they were sent back by their employers, or they were actually packed in very small apartments. So what that led to is that rooftops in the city have become the new public spaces, because this is where the police cannot find you. There was also one of the very few places when people could breathe some fresh air, like etc. And there was also like another issue was the informal sector. In Morocco, about 80%, like of the jobs are part of the informal sector, and that was actually hit horribly by the pandemic. So millions that used to be in the streets of Morocco and making the streets actually very lively and bringing the urban vibrancy, you know, from street vendors, you know, like to people working just, you know, like informal jobs, you know, all those had no way to live. So what I would like to actually claim is almost like a small manifesto, is to say that now more than ever, really time has come for us architects, urban planners, and landscape architects to address the need of the marginalized and the disadvantaged. And I think we need, I mean, so what should we do? I think we really need to focus on the shortage of social housing. So Morocco is not the only country, obviously, that's lacking social housing. I mean, just here in Toronto, I think that 65 to 70% of people that need social housing cannot have, you know, like access to it. And then, so we need them to, you know, envision more innovative, you know, like approaches to affordable housing, to also self-sustaining neighborhoods. And I think also, I mean, for the cases of the Global South, to integrate the informal sector in the design of public spaces to make it more resilient. And I think finally, we need to regain our agency in the public arena. We are a service industry, you know, like unfortunately as designers, we're waiting for a commission, you know, like to arrive. And I really believe we need to step up politically, you know, like to make, you know, like all of these changes that we dream to happen after Corona happened. So now I would like to just share with you, I mean, do I have some time actually? Yes, no, 2 minutes? So let me, okay, 3.
You have a bit of time.
Okay, very good. So I cannot share my screen. I think you need to let me share my screen. Since you're the host, you just need to enable share screening. So, you know, like as I'm waiting, anyways, what I've, yeah, no, not yet. You know, like one of the cornerstone, I think, for this change, for me to in a way,
you should be able to now.
Thank you. Let me see. Yeah, just give me 1 second. Can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good. So what I wanted, you know, to stress in this 2 minutes, maybe very quickly through some of our project in the office, that highlight one thing that I found was extremely important to try to make this inequality, I think, less strong, you know, like in our cities. And I think it's to be able to work with the population themselves. So in a way to harness public knowledge and to actually co-design with people, because they know mostly what they need in their cities. And very quickly, just some project. This is the rehabilitation of the thermal bath of Jean-François Evaco that was built in the 60s. There was semi-abandoned and that we are rehabilitated now, thanks to a Getty grant. And, you know, like what we did in a way is this, you know, like any modernist project, you know, 2 small villages were eradicated. People were moved far away to be able to build this huge project in the 60s. So more than, you know, kind of a technical problem of the concrete having cracks and so forth, what we found is that we had to heal this scar that had happened between the local population that in a way hated this new compound because it took away their livelihood that was in the middle of an oasis. So we did a series of exercises with the kids, with collages, to engage them in the future of their thermal bath station. We used the model making. We worked with people in the informal sector. Since the thermal station closed, there were many markets that opened. I'm sorry, I need to charge my computer, sorry. And then, like here in the Dra Valley in Morocco also, where we were commissioned by an NGO to design a school, where, you know, like one of the first thing we did was actually was to again use model making with kids to be able to understand what the programs they need. And again, this is a very marginalized and remote community. In another tense environment, we worked at the border between Jordan and Syria on the design of a playground in a national park. It was supposed to be an educational playground. And here we actually use, I mean, here, sorry, you know, kind of you know, like a technique of a video where, because since we had to deal with the kids that came from refugee camps and Jordanian kids, and there were like a lot of tension, we just tried to keep it fun, and we made this little video with this two little fingers that walk around and that actually design the park. And finally, like another project here in the south of Morocco, whereas maybe you know, you don't know, but there are political tensions in those regions between the native Saharan people and then, you know, kind of the rest of the Moroccans, and where we worked on the improvement of public spaces, because the population used to be nomadic 1 or 2 generations ago. Their understanding of public space was very different than what was designed for them. And we actually developed an app, which was very simple, like a collage app, that could actually, where people could actually change their environment so can better understand it. But we saw also that technology was not welcomed by everyone. And we actually also used a collage technique that then we took the photo, we uploaded on the app, and both the analog and the digital collages were treated the same way. And at the end, we had, you know, kind of huge database of information on how to improve and envision new public spaces. So thank you. I would like to end. I know that I went over my time. So just as a conclusion, as you see, I am as part of the camp of the optimists. I think that a return to normal would be impossible. We cannot, as you can imagine, at the beginning of the pandemic, you were saying, oh, I want life to return to normal. I'm sick of being confined. Well, actually, I think if we return to normal would be a huge mistake. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aziza. I'm really interested in the quarantine circumstances in Morocco and just in general how quarantine is different in different places. I also heard from one of my friends in Jordan that during the height of the quarantine there, that nobody could leave their homes except in an ambulance to go to the hospital. So they couldn't even go to the pharmacy or to the supermarket for essential things. And I just think that it's really interesting how these sort of strategies helped to contain the virus, but at the same time, people were really, their civil liberties were taken away from them. It was really interesting for you to share that with us. And also this idea of the poor and the rich, and how actually being able to quarantine in many ways is a privilege for a lot of people, and that they don't have that privilege. So thank you so much for that. Our next speaker tonight is, well, depending on where you are, our next speaker is Nasrine Seraji. She's actually a compatriot of mine. She also comes from Iran. With a long list of awards and accolades, I'll just list 2 of them. She's the recipient of the Knight of the Legion of Honor, and she's an officier of the Order of the National Merit and the Arts and Letters of France. She's involved in research, teaching, and her practice, Atelier Seraji. She's completed several notable buildings, including apartment buildings in Vienna, student housing in Paris, and much more. She's also taught at many universities and architectural schools, including Columbia, the AA, Princeton, Cornell, and others.
Marziah, are you frozen?
Vicente, like, do you want to continue the bio of Nasrine?
Oh, because Marziah is frozen. Yeah, so yeah, I think that Marziah quit. So what we are going to do is, in fact, Nasrine, as I said before, she's not here, but she recorded yesterday a conversation with me. So what we are going to do is I will share my screen and then we'll listen to Nasrine from my screen, okay? So let's try to see if this works well.
Hello, Vicente, and thank you very much for inviting me to be with this collective of architects to all think about this, this question of life, living, the city, and what's becoming of us after this disaster of coronavirus, COVID-19, the virus that basically changed the world. I suppose in 2001, we could say that 2 airplanes changed the world. And in 2020, 19 years later, we can say that the smallest thing that nobody can see changed the world. I think one of the things that is, I've been thinking about this, and I think one of the things that is quite important without wanting to enter into all these generalities is that we went through a moment in our history that territories expanded, everything expanded. You know, globalization made us think that there is no distance that is impossible. We would think of getting on the plane from Paris and going and presenting something in China or in Hong Kong or in, I don't know, in the Philippines or in Malaysia, that it was just enough to pick up 2 shirts and your computer and go. The distance completely disappeared. And I think that this thing, this COVID-19, this pandemic, has brought us to think about the shrinking of the territories again. So the territories are shrinking physically, but also perceptually. So that's going to have a huge, I think, impact on the way that we as architects are going to be thinking about not only the city, but our practices. Why is this going to happen is because of the fact that it's going to be very, very difficult to see what these bubbles are going to be. You know, we are talking about Europe being one bubble, and perhaps New Zealand and Australia and parts of China being another bubble. And this, not wanting to enter too much into the geopolitics of this, I still cannot pull myself away from that because it's extremely important in this, you know. Now, at the same time, there's another thing that is happening, which is quite important, I think, and that is that one of the most important things that every human being has is being taken away from us, and that is the relationship that we have with our bodies. It's not so much that one would get this sickness and sort of be better after 15 days or die after 10 days. It's the fact that we have no longer the control. The fear comes from this not having the control of our bodies, which is probably the most private space that we can think about. And so this privacy, this private space is being taken away from us from something which is very abstract. So it's going to be extremely important for us to be able to, as architects, to really think about 2 essential things that we have always been thinking about, and that is, why did we even come up with architecture? I mean, if we want to go back to the primitive hut, we started to protect ourselves from nature. So we protected ourselves from nature, then there was a roof. There was a roof, and this roof allowed us to not be under the rain and the wind and everything else. Then the roof began to become spatial. And what did we do with that space in the roof? We started storing things in it. So it became the stock place. It became where we could stock things where we could, when we couldn't have it. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Where are we going to store everything that we need in the city today? Where are we going to, how are we going to deal with the question of mobility versus the networks versus the flow of not only this bandwidth that we're talking across from Hong Kong to Barcelona, but also the flow of the essentials. One of the things that we saw in the pandemic happening in our cities was that everything was shut, especially with the lockdowns, and the only working class of the metropolis were those that were distributing things. So this is going to have an effect on our houses, on our living spaces, on the way that we're going to be looking at our cities. I think that therefore it's going to have an incredible consequence on how we see densities. Again, I've been asking myself this question of how come, it's not about learning from Hong Kong, but how come one of the densest cities in the world didn't have a lockdown? What happened that this virus didn't hit Hong Kong? 6 deaths, 1,400 and something sick people. So we know that Hong Kong has an incredibly efficient logistic capacity. This logistic capacity, even in a lockdown, would have been able to allow survival to happen within incredibly small spaces. Now, if we take all of these ingredients into our thinking, I think in architecture, is that there are basically 2 things that I think become extremely important, and for whoever is going to be sort of entering this competition, and I hope that there's going to be thousands of architects, young architects that are going to be entering this competition, there are a few questions that would be quite important for all of us to encourage the competitors to ask. How do we deal with distribution and storage? Because we know that the dematerialization, the digital, has taught us to think that, or has brought us to think that there is no material. Now the logistics rely on 2 things. One, which is the dematerial stuff, and the other one is the absolute material stuff of the logistics of the storage of things. So that's going to be quite important, both in our cities, but also within the individual apartments. The other thing is going to be the how we're going to actually make our houses, our apartments, to be that place that perhaps we may have to even die in. I'm not saying that these apartments are going to have to become hospitals, but the relationship, it goes back to the initial relationship of the roof space or the attic and the tomb and the cemetery. So if we want to, I mean, we don't want to be, I don't want to sort of go from death to life, but at the same time, the most essential moment that this COVID-19 has brought us to think are these 2 poles. The polarity that exists is extremely important for architecture. And so in the cities, I think it would be the flow and the logistics and the storage. And in the most private space, that's the public, the private space would obviously be the relationship that we have to our bodies. And this is going to change. And this COVID-19 has made us think very differently about our bodies. So I hope that at some point, whoever is going to be entering again is going to be addressing these questions. I mean, the topics are there are multiple topics, and one could go on talking about this probably for half an hour and do some research on this and bring it to certain other questions. But I think that I've probably touched upon 2 or 3 very essential, thought-provoking, perhaps, moments that we're going to have to deal with as architects.
Well,
thank you, Vicente. And thank you, Nasrine. I thought that that was a very insightful talk. The polarity of life and death and how we're sort of understanding or gaining a new understanding of our connection to our bodies, something that maybe we took for granted up until now. For me, it's very interesting. And I have a lot of questions actually to ask the panel on this topic. But I will now introduce our last panelist tonight, Dana Behrman. She's a senior urban designer and associate at UNStudio in Amsterdam. Hi. She joined the studio in 2014. She's a British-Israeli architect with experience at Foster & Partners, among other places. She graduated from the AA, and she has an MA in Research Architecture from the Center of RNA at Goldsmith University of London. Interestingly, she was also an animator for a time at various film studios, including MTV. She even has an IMDb page, which I thought was very interesting. And so it shouldn't be surprising that Dana is also an urban strategist at Unsense, a platform that works at the intersection of technology and the built environment, using architecture, urban design, and technologies to gain insight into how human behavior can adapt space. Unsense is based in the Freedom Lab campus, a crossover innovation hub in Amsterdam. And with that brief introduction, I'll turn over the podium to Dana.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this amazing group of women thinkers. Excuse me for the internet connection. I'll switch off the camera and turn on the screen just so it doesn't break, if you don't mind. Okay. I wanted to draw a link to something that Caroline mentioned at the end of her conversation, thinking about the emotional health of people and of our communities. And that's something that as practitioners, as urban planners and designers, we often focus too much maybe on the physical health and of course the social health, but it is the psychological health and the emotional health that we need to really put some focus on. And this kind of human nature is a bit of a pun because it is of course about how we think and how we act and how we feel as people. But that is of course needs to be in link and in connection with nature and what's around us. And with that I want to draw also a kind of a connection to what Vicente was saying about climate change and the global challenges that we are facing today, that of course the pandemic, but we should also maybe not forget about the other issues that we were fighting for, focusing on for a long time. So what is nature and cities? I mean, there are many ways of looking at nature and think about climate change. This is a visualization from a video game that looks at Dubai in the future, where the climate will change completely. Is that something that we are waiting for? Or is it this kind of utopian view of, in this case, London underwater being flooded? What is the relationship between nature and the cities that we've designed? That's the question. I've looked up, I think I skipped, yeah. And this is an important slide because this is today. So not visions for video games of the future. This is a month ago in Rotterdam. This is our life in Amsterdam. We're in the Netherlands now, where we have these circles of 1.5 meter everywhere. Also now on sidewalks and next to the canals. People want to go out. People are happy to leave the house finally, but they need to do it in a healthy way. They are craving green spaces, but how can they actually use those green spaces in the city? And that is something that as designers, we have the responsibility to think about nature and urban nature in perhaps different terms that we did in the past. Now, I looked a little bit at what is green space in cities. Of course, Amsterdam, that's where we are. We don't rank very high, I have to say, in the 50s. Actually, top of the list is Durban in South Africa, and second in the list is Rio de Janeiro. But was interesting to see the relationship between the city and its green spaces, and specifically to the post-corona or post-COVID life that we're going to have, or life with COVID. How much urban green space do we actually assign for people? 70 square meter per person now sounds quite good. This is Barcelona, much higher in the ranking, in the 20s. Gives much more space per person, but also in general kind of allows for green spaces to be really part of the network of the cities, of the city. So how do we look at nature at UNStudio? We look at nature as something that has evolved and developed to become a really major partner in the designing of cities. And when we think about, for example, the kind of the future of the Hague, we imagined a future where nature and infrastructure could come together and create kind of co-benefit of its existence in the city. In this case, it is a space that is on top of train tracks. We've created these infrastructure that can actually retain water and purify it and then share it with the rest of the neighborhood. And then at the same time also create very exciting public space. We also see nature as a very productive element that needs to be integrated within city if we want to generate enough food. Not all of it, not the whole diet, but some of it could be also perhaps produced in cities. And to make sure that we design cities in a sustainable way, we need to think about the scale in which we are working with. And then also the relationship between people and nature and production of nature. This is an example from a project we're working on in the south of the Netherlands, really trying to think about how to create an innovative space that can experiment with different types of nature and city making. In order to create prototype of new ways of living and then export it around the world. But in terms of nature here is really the essence of kind of the productivity of nature and how it helps people be more perhaps healthier or connected. And then this is from a project we are busy with in Melbourne, the Green Spine. And it's two towers that are centered in really at the heart of the city, and they are in a really strategic place in the city, right on top of a boulevard that is green and accessible for people. But we are thinking about nature inclusive design. We are creating these kind of green superhighways. That's how I like to see it. Bringing in flora and fauna from the ground floor. They can climb up to the towers. So vertical and really horizontal green spaces that really help the city and gives people the benefit of being close to nature. And for the success of perhaps every urban development, but specifically one that has nature in it, we believe that we need to think about scale. So small scale, flexible, will give us resiliency. This is from a project we did in Singapore. Of course, climate there is very forgiving and helps nature to really take its role and its place. But with the help of understanding how to maintain nature and how to use it in a way that is resilient, will only bring the benefit further. Yeah, and yeah, just one more image of Singapore. These are images really from by now over a year ago. Now you can imagine that nature has kind of grown and almost took over all those spaces. But it's the benefit of bringing the outside inside and the inside outside, and it allows to create spaces that perhaps should rely less on air conditioning and give more natural conditions to the people who use them. Now I brought a small video just to end. I don't think you hear the sound, but this is just a little bit of a view of our neighborhood and the things that we care about and we see in cities that we love. This is my colleague, Maria. So it is about paying attention to what's around us and highlighting what we think is inspiring. That's it for me.
Donna, thank you so much for that very beautiful presentation. It was very centering and very peaceful to see it.
Thank you.
Now we have, thank you. Now we have about 30 minutes. We can have a bit of a debate, and that will be followed by a Q&A time. For anybody who has questions, there are two ways that you can ask your questions. One is to just type the questions in the chat space. I really encourage you to do this because the panelists can read your questions and then answer when the time is right. Or when it's the Q&A time, you can just turn on your mic and ask your questions. But you can sort of think of those now while I start the debate. I was very stricken by Nasrine's comment about the 9/11 Twin Tower tragedy that sort of set this global impact for the entire decade moving forward. And now in 2020, how this invisible enemy is changing our lives at an unprecedented pace. And something that was really interesting about this crisis was that as a global community, we were sort of brought together against an invisible enemy that transgresses borders, power, affluence. And I have a lot of examples of people near and dear to me who have given up their dreams and changed their life direction as a result of the pandemic. Actually, many people, and I assume many other of you also have this experience. And that's something that I find particularly poignant about this is that while this giving up of dreams at first seemed to be quite a tragedy, in retrospect, all of the people that I talked to, they sort of share this feeling of relief and peace to have sort of returned to the essentials of life and what means the most to them. And I'm really interested to know your perspective, the panelists, on this issue and how a crisis has reminded us of our humanity, of our sense of community, how it has maybe changed our perception of us versus them, and maybe it hasn't, and how you think that this can influence society moving forward.
I think it's very optimistic to think that it's going to last. I mean, that's in a way the sad thing, and we can just look back at a history. I'm married to a historian, and he keeps on reminding me and giving me examples in the past when a crisis would occur, a small change would happen, and then we'll return back to normal. In a way, we return to normal because of many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that the economic system where we live, it's an economic system where we need to consume, where we are traveling, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that a systemic change needs to occur. I mean, obviously we can do small little steps, you know, like ourselves, but sadly, I think a larger systemic change needs to happen for, you know, like our cities to transform.
I'm currently reading a book by a Dutch science writer called Rutger Bregman. It's also being translated into English, and he had a review in The Guardian. And his thesis is people are good. Most people are actually good. And there's a lot of negativity bias also in the news reporting. A lot of expectations and a sort of a psychological belief that took hold, especially after the Second World War, that most people are bad and are that all of us are capable of doing incredible evil, but not just capable of, but we just choose always the bad thing rather than the good thing. But he has done a lot of historic research that proves the opposite. Most people are good. So there's also reasons, I think, for optimism. I also I do share the concern that we, the system that we have leads to a lot of, it's not good for the planet as it is. So that is not a good thing. But I think that there is a drive in all of us to make the right decisions, and we can. Most of us can.
I'd like to add to that, also in relation to Aziz's presentation, with all these beautiful photos of the community engagement. I mean, that is always inspiring to see. I join Caroline with that kind of the optimism about human nature and about people. And I think what's perhaps the most heartening thing that we saw during this period is the sense of community that has been that has emerged. People are really getting to know their neighbors. I can say that about myself, at least. Neighbors that, you know, I've never spoken to have now, you know, reached out if they needed something. Elderly people in our neighborhood are now getting supplies by their neighbors. I mean, this is something that we shouldn't forget about, you know, when we go back to our busy lives again.
But maybe the question is, how can we as designer facilitate that this memory stays, right? I mean, right now we are all connected to each other and we're helping each other because of the fear of the pandemic and the situation we're in. But when we're going to go back to a more of individualistic society, which is now the capitalist society where we live, I mean, in my country, Morocco, for example, the social ties are very present. So it was not news. I don't think that emerged after the pandemic. It's something that's part of the society and the global South that exists. I mean, people survive very often because they can support each other. But let's say in the global North, how would you as a designer I mean, I don't know, is it through public spaces and so forth that you can make this engagement between the community continue?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly how I see it. It is about designing the immediate spaces in a much more flexible way and allowing cities to change their uses. We see it with Amsterdam. The Amsterdam municipality have come out with a document 2 weeks after we went into lockdown, or maybe a little bit after that, suggesting how we can change our streets now that they have less cars and less tourists around. Super inspiring document. It just says, hey, if you have a parking spot that has been empty for some time, occupy it. You know, put some furniture there, use it. So they're encouraging people to really look at their surroundings and transform it to a way that can help neighbors to come together, you know, in a safe environment. So there are ways to do it that don't require systemic changes and with a lot of money in it.
I think that maybe, yeah, as designers, it can be good to assume also some positivity, which I think a lot, especially when, you know, ambitious, academically grounded design tends to maybe, yeah, seek relevance in, yeah, criticality, which is good, but yeah, it can maybe can be an automatism to look for a blackest scenario, and how helpful is it to do that? But I mean, it sounds as if we are, you know, just yeah, we're not blind, obviously, to real problems, but we also see opportunities where we, in practice, we encounter them on a daily basis, where we can engage people. And for instance, the projects that Dana showed very briefly really merges also this smart technology, trying to make people share. If they grow food, share it and use smart technology to do that. And for instance, if your neighbor is collecting solar energy, maybe you know, don't turn on your washing machines all at the same time. And for those tiny little simple things that yet incrementally can have enormous effects, we can harness technology. And I think that what Dana said, that the solidarity that we see coming up, which also, you know, Black Lives Matter, not for nothing, is this, you know, really for many people was a reason to break lockdown, because everyone felt this is just so incredibly problematic, and we have to do something about it. And that comes up now also at this time. I think that's meaningful in a positive way.
I would like to answer. So thank you so much. I agree with all the positivity, and I mean, for all of us, I mean, in the Global South, we look at Holland as the most amazing examples, not just in the Global South, in Toronto too, when our previous mayor was removing bike lane, and people thinking that it was normal to give back the street to the car. I mean, in a way, for us, Holland is such an amazing, you know, like example of I would say ethical of urban design, and also of environmental, you know, like urban design. So thank you for giving us that inspiration. And I would like to answer Anya Mesoud, who was asking me about the future of social housing in Morocco, and she was, you know, interested in this roofscape that suddenly, because of the density of, you know, like informal housing and also affordable housing, the roof suddenly became the new street. And actually, this is interesting because it's not new. I mean, traditionally in the medieval towns of Morocco, the roofs were, I mean, my grandmother used to tell me that she was not allowed to go too much on the street, but the roof was the world of women, where they would, you know, like do their laundry, cook, and meet, you know, like each other, jump even from roof to roof, and the street was the realm of men. So in a way, is this reinvention of this Moroccan tradition. However, what I want to tell her is that when the Moroccan government realized that that was happening, they actually started using drones for control. I mean, that begs another, you know, set of questions about, you know, like individual freedom and our right to privacy in this moment of pandemic. I mean, should the general health of all be, you know, like an excuse to actually take away certain personal freedoms? And now, you know, kind of regarding the future of social housing in Morocco, what I want to mention is that the Moroccan government, I think about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, launched this new program called Cities Without Shanty Towns, Villes sans bidonville, by giving like a tax break to developers, so they don't need to pay a tax if they actually doing social housing. And what that led to is that a huge boom in, you know, like affordable housing, but obviously the developers wanted to make you know, like a lot of profit. So they built very quickly using one type that very often had no ventilation, you know, it was very small light, very, very dense. So there was no control, and I think no regulations that were, you know, like established. And the result of it is that a huge amount of now what was meant to be social housing, but actually it's even too expensive. It's like mid-class housing, but very poorly designed. And what is the future? Well, in my own research, I focus on the post-colonial and independence, you know, kind of housing in Morocco that in a way was inherited from Michel Ecochard, which reinvented in Morocco the social housing by reinterpreting the courtyard house, both in one level, but also on, you know, multiple levels. I'm sure you know the Candilis building, a social housing building in Morocco called Denis d'Abeille, which is a vertical reinterpretation of the courtyard house. So I think a certain reinvention of the traditions and of the vernacular and architecture that respond to the climate, to also the need of Moroccans to gather and to have social meetings and social spaces, of course, with new norms of security. I think those, I mean, for me, are the requirement for future of social housing in Morocco. Sorry, it was long.
No, that's very interesting.
No, thank you so much for that. Actually, it's interesting because just now Vicente and I were having a bit of a back and forth, and he was reminding me that the revolution in Iran started on the rooftops, which is actually quite true and quite interesting. It's something that I had forgotten about, but it was what created solidarity between the people of Iran against the government. So it's kind of interesting how we sort of forget about this layer of the city, and then it really comes into force at specific times for everyone. We do have a few more minutes, so I do have a few more questions. One that is particularly interesting to me, and I think it is actually interesting to everybody, is about public space. there's a lot of restrictions on the use of public space and social distancing that have been key policy measures to reduce the transmission of the SARS-CoV-2 and protect public health. And at a time, 1/2 of the world's population had been asked to stay home and avoid many public spaces. But these spaces are actually really often the heart of the community. They're the places that bring people together. And I think that the depth and extent of this transformation is unclear, especially as it relates to the future of the designing of our cities and how our perception of public space might change. But it is possible that our relationship with public space could fundamentally change. And I'm wondering what you think the long-term impacts of COVID-19 can be on public space, even after the restrictions are lifted, or now as the restrictions are lifting, and how that will change or inform our decisions in urban planning post the pandemic. Anyone want to?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we really have the responsibility to find the answers. That's for sure. But I think, we always work, and when we think about planning for the future, we experiment with scenarios. We try to imagine how multiple possibilities could function within the city, and that's something that I strongly feel that we need to test or to bring faster in our design is this concept of flexibility. How can we see the city as a flexible space that can be used in different ways for different purposes? So streets are no longer just streets. There are also maybe roads are places to walk on when there is a lockdown, in order to give a bit more space between people. As I said, parking spaces turned into gardens. I mean, there's multiple opportunities to look at the city as something flexible, and what municipalities need to do is to allow this flexibility to happen. Yeah, but as designers, we need to think about it from the start of each project, right? How do we design for those multiple opportunities, so to allow enough space to be generous with our designs?
I think, I agree. I think from the perspective of Morocco and the global South, whereas we've seen there is a lack already of public spaces and green spaces, especially, and also spaces where people that are stuck in one small, apartment can go to, aside from the roofs. So I think, spaces that can quickly, emerge in town is the adaptive reuse of buildings that are, abandoned, like the Sidi Harzem thermal bath that I showed you, that were not demolished because it was too expensive to demolish a huge concrete brutalist monster that's actually quite beautiful. So that in a way saved it. And so in Moroccan cities, for example, you have a lot of this modern, abandoned buildings that can actually be transformed into public spaces, quite easily and with very few funds.
I think it's really interesting. I'm just reading a question from Andreas Mans, which is sort of tying onto the back of the discussion that we're having right now. And he asks, for city design, wouldn't this be the time to really recover and reinforce Serda's idea of Barcelona's Eixample, the green areas inside the house blocks, pedestrian areas, etc. And I think that that's kind of ties onto this idea of how are we looking at our public space.
Yeah, I think the challenge truly is that in the face of climate change and actually the lack of water in many regions of the world, for me, the biggest challenge would be to think of public spaces and green spaces, especially in a comprehensive way, right? In Morocco or in other countries, you can plant something is going to become yellow if you don't have, enough water. So I think they're very closely tied together, climate change and spaces of, public space. We saw images in the presentation of Dana of Singapore, and I was extremely jealous to see this very lush vegetation, just plant it, you don't even need to water it. So just something to keep in mind. Water.
You're right, it was a quick win.
That beautiful one.
You know, something else that I found really interesting happening during the pandemic was how people reconnected with nature, because they couldn't spend so much time with each other, but they could go on a hike or go into the forest, you know, as long as, you know, it's secluded and not close to other people. And so a lot of people did that. They just sort of maybe isolated from other people, but really took that time to go back into nature and to really create a new connection with nature. And something that a lot of my friends I noticed were doing during the pandemic is that they were growing gardens inside, and just, you know, buying plants and setting up like inside gardens or gardens on their terraces, something that they didn't really commonly do before. And I think that this is kind of interesting, that we're looking at this idea of what public spaces can be. And again, the comment from Andreas Mans about like the Serta block and bringing green in. And it's interesting how people just sort of naturally gravitate towards these things. I think that that's very interesting. I do have a few questions, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their own questions. I have a question from Vicente to all the panelists. He wants to know from each speaker, from the 3 speakers, if you were entering the competition, which idea would you like to develop?
Affordable housing.
I think I would also do probably be in competition, because I think that would also be, it's certainly from here, from the perspective, and it's what I liked about discussion, we're very personal, much more personal than maybe in most forums and debates. We talk about our friends and what everyone has been doing, and this question has been coming up a lot, you know, for us in cities in general. Living is becoming more and more unaffordable for, you know, just for professionals, for all the people upholding society. So it's a very, very big issue, and I think we need to put a lot of creativity in it in the next few years.
I was quite inspired by Aziza's lecture, so I would like to investigate kind of the rooftops, or kind of the city in different levels, you know, and how can we connect spaces on different heights or kind of spaces in the city together, and give people the flexibility to move around in, not just in a horizontal way or vertical, but in between these axes.
So sort of looking at the in-between spaces. I think that in-between spaces became a very interesting concept during the crisis, because people couldn't go out into the streets, but they could go onto their terraces, and then the terrace became a place where people could connect and even have parties and get to know their neighbors, as many of you are saying. And I think that often these places are leftover spaces, depending on which city you're living in the world. In Iran, terraces are usually used to hang the clothes out to dry. So it's really interesting how our understanding of these spaces has changed during this crisis. I think that do we have any last questions from anyone? We do have a few more minutes before we can close out. It's your last chance.
Maybe one thing that if
Are there any last comments? We do have a last question. So, as a master's student who strongly feels that improved and more social housing is important, the previous idea that we as future professionals should use our power to advocate as such, are there effective strategies that you would recommend to young urbanists that are starting out in this field?
yeah, it's very difficult. It's also yeah, I'm sorry, I can't remember which of you said it, but we are, of course, always dependent on people wanting to work with us. We don't work solitary, so our strategies will have to be yeah, cooperative with other parties. But I think for myself, what I am doing now, as I also seriously ponder this question, also as I'm besides still fully engaged in UNStudio, and for this year I'm also 2 days a week assisting or being actually a sort of director concepts for a socially orientated project developer in the Netherlands. So this is it's a question that I'm now looking at from two sides of the table, as it were. And so I'm also looking at the historic moments, really trying to look at historic moments where changes happened, that really, yeah. And also, for instance, seeing at what about temporary housing after Second World War. Temporary housing was an option for maybe periods of 10 to 15 years. What can we do to speed it up? Because the need is massive, and with just a few thousand houses per year per developer, we're not really making enough progress. So yeah, things like that's a bit messy answer, but that's my answer at the moment.
My answer would be to actually not underestimate the possibilities of self-directed or self-initiated projects and guerrilla type of project in the urban space. Because as a young designer starting, you're gonna start your career, you're gonna need, like to learn many things and to establish networks and meet potential future clients, etc. But I think as a young person, if you want to be like an activist on the street and make changes happen, then make them happen for yourself, yeah, if you can. It doesn't need to be something huge, can be a very small thing that you can change in your neighborhood, in your street, in your playground, like anything that you can add, I think, or any, let's say, service that you can offer to an entity that cannot afford to hire like a designer, because we need to admit it, we are a profession as architects and often also designers, but we're paid for a service, not, like everyone can, like afford our services. So maybe this is the advice that I would give you. Volunteer for entities or NGO that cannot afford hiring an architect on urban design.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Of course, be persistent and be enthusiastic and follow your dreams and things that interest you, but also form networks that are beyond just architects. We work with many different thinkers and innovators and specialists in different fields. And we find that sometimes our conversations, often maybe your conversations and new ideas come up with the chat that we had with a sustainability expert or a landscape designer or an artist or a community activist. So don't just try to be the best architect in the world. Try to be the best kind of networker, or kind of open to many other ideas. You just don't know where it will take you.
I can second that, Donna. I want to thank all of our panelists today for their insight and their incredible presentations. We'll be closing the Zoom meeting now, but will everyone, before we end, turn on their cameras so that we can all say goodbye to each other? Don't be shy.
But people might be in their pajamas.
We love
We just need a smile.
We love pajamas. Elena, Rafael, Susan, Risuke, Unia, Kenneth, Laia Pifarré. Sorry, I see some Russian letters. Maybe this is Diana or Dana. Anya is what?
Dasha, nice to meet you.
Dasha, hello. And Anya. So
Let's have some cameras on.
Elena Pirtak. Good. So Marcia and all the speakers, thank you very much. It has been great. Laia, hello. It has been great to see all of you. Alitzel Espinosa. Great. And so for those that you have been following us, I don't know if someone will apply for the competition. There are many people already registered, but for those that make great projects, we have some of the euros here. We have the opportunity to get a scholarship and to come next year to Barcelona. And so we are waiting. 15 July will be the last day for the delivery of the project. So we are waiting for your proposals. Okay.
Good luck to everyone who's submitting a project.
Good luck.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
It was a
Bye.
pleasure.
Thank you very much.
you.
I enjoyed a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for Donna. Thank you. I enjoyed.
Caroline. Kiana.